Usually, maybe without being aware of it, you're writing about something you're obsessed about, be it nature, be it whatever it is, politics, romance, family, you're obsessed with it. And if you go back and look at a year's worth of poems, you'll start to see those themes come out. But what I did do was went to every reading I could go to, every workshop I could go to, every lecture I could go to, listen to things online, bought as many books as I could afford, subscribed to as many journals, and just over. Somebody said, it was a young student, said, but doesn't that take longer? I said, what, you got ants in your pants? What's the rush? Yes, it takes longer, but you will get there. So it can be done.
Okay, welcome everyone to Caffeinated Verse. I think I recognize and know everyone here, so you are very familiar with the format. But just in case, I want to say we will start with our featured reading, followed by a Q&A where I'll ask 3 or 4 questions. We're all very chatty today. I hope we're not going to be chatty when our feature comes up to read. Yeah.
Maybe.
Because you're going to get told off. All right. So our feature today was the 4th Poet Laureate for the city of Los Angeles. The daughter of Caribbean immigrants, her poetry collections include Beg No Pardon, published in 2007, and winner of the Perugia Press Prize and the Great Lakes Colleges Associations, and Blue on a Blue Palette, published by BOA Editions in 2024. Her honours include the Tucson Festival of Books Literary Award in Poetry and the Stephen Dunn Prize for Poetry. Her works appeared in many literary magazines, including Ploughshares, Poetry, and Poem a Day with the Academy of American Poets. She is a native of Los Angeles, California, where she resides. Please welcome to the podium, Lynne Thompson.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I assure you, no one will be yelled at if you want to chat. That happens. I'm just so pleased to be here today to see the faces of old friends, new friends. It was beautiful driving over here today with Malibu heavy in the hearts of all of us, as well as Altadena with the recent fires. But you could never tell it by today because it looks gorgeous. So I am going to read for about 15 minutes and keep my eye on the clock. All of the poems I'm going to read are from this latest collection, Blue on a Blue Palette. In shameless self-promotion, I do have a few copies here for sale in case anybody wants one. The book is primarily about women, our rages, our joys, our happiness, our sexuality, our spirituality, the whole thing, how pissed off we are having time. An untamed rebel resists Octavio Armand's poem Soneto, consisting of 14 lines, each asserting Yo soy un hombre sincero, the title, longest title I ever wrote. Since the dawn of tadpoles in the bog, before the gleam radiating from your mother's eye, somewhere between home and honey, and he never knew what hit him, is everything that makes the orb revolve. Everything has evolved from singularity, something more than individuality, which is nothing less than a woman who is nothing if not true. The mirror reflection of everything that is the inverse of woman. She who is anti-meridian, una mujer, woman, an antonym for a man by any other name, and that's been true since the dawn of tadpoles. This next piece is a form I think I invented, and unless somebody tells me differently, I'm going to continue to say that I invented it, which is, it's partially a cento or cento, which is just an Italian word for quilt, where I take lines of other poets and rearrange them to make a new poem, but it's also written in the form of a pantun, which is an old Malaysian form that lines repeat in. I'm calling it a chentun. These are the lines of Terrence Hayes and Diane Seuss.
Could you read closer to the mic?
Yes, can people hear me? Should I hold it? Will that help? I'll hold it.
What's the name of the poem again, Lynn?
Frankly, that is better. Frankly, when asked about the autonomy of my body, I consider my inner assassin, as inside me is a black-eyed animal, the umbilicus from which everything originates. I have no origin story. Unburdened by conscience, like a baby, the umbilicus from which everything originates. I wonder if Jesus wants souls like the devil does, unburdened by conscience, like a baby. The list of pallbearers still in a drawer somewhere. I bet you shapeshifters want souls like the devils do, their hinges turning, the list of pallbearers still in a drawer somewhere. An existential jambalaya. Their hinges turning, a clamor of voltas, or some existential jambalaya. My only fear of a virtuous mob. A clamor of voltas shaped like a silver tongue. My deepest fear, a virtuous mob of mother wit and mother woe. Shaped like a silver tongue, I have no origin story of mother wit and mother woe. Inside me is a black-eyed animal. So thanks to those two poets for making me look so hard. And being a poet, we love to play with words. We love synonyms and metaphor and homonyms and similes and all of that. This poem is entitled Separate, Separate. Mother conjured me as an adjective before she verbed me, as disconnected, placenta notwithstanding, as discreet, thinking I would never tell, as distinct in the way the outlines drown around a victim of mayhem are distinct, as free-standing, but who among my kinfolk was ever truly free? Or maybe my first mother just chose to disentangle, to sever my limbs from her torso, to sunder, let go, let God, that bitch. See literature and law, how they enshrine dichotomy. A separate piece, separate but equal, while some musicians propose a different riddle. See a tribe called quests, separate together, where we stand great among creation. The process of bringing someone into existence. The polar opposite of unmaking by separation. The etymology made manifest as separatum, circa 1425, just about the time the Portuguese began to traffic in snatching the fula and the wola, asleep in the teal. Is this how the art of disjoining became so popular that now it's not extraordinary to remove pearls from the oyster, to poach an elephant's tusk for her ivory? Okay, so my mother would be horrified by this poem, and that's partially why I wrote it. And since it is the Easter and Passover season, I'll read this. Revelations. I quit because the rituals became dark dust on the scales, because one worshiper kicked a mongrel the day after she took communion. I did love the incense, the holies marijuana, and the psalms sung by sweet boys before the holy rising of their new penises. But the wafers were usually stale, The wine was a box of Gallo, and Solomon did threaten both of those sniveling mothers. I quit because my own mother despised a frail woman bound to a wheelchair. I quit because I love sin, the stink and risk of it, no matter how many amens absolve, as well as the velvet rose, golden chalices, the eternal wondering. What of Mary Magdalene's nightly hustle? What of a black Lazarus denied his right to rise? Edward, you're not going to burn me at the stake. I think I have time. I'm going to conclude with 4 more poems. This one, if you don't know the artist Betty Saar, S-A-A-R, seek her out. She is 94 and still working furiously. She's got an exhibition at the Huntington Museum right now. She's amazing. So this poem takes titles of several of her works to write a biography for women. Assemblage. We were born from the time in between, in the house of Tarot, born of Our Lady of the Shadows, and we have survived 10 secret mojos. We got a conjure bag, got good luck tokens and some herbs. We know how to catch a unicorn because we are spirit catchers. We are not some high priestess, but we have a view from the sorcerer's window. Have never belonged to the black crows in the white section only. We are not one of those midnight Madonnas, but neither are we rainbow babes in the woods. Sometimes we dream about grandmother's house when it was indigo mercy. Was she bequeathed us her house of the open hand, so we wouldn't live an imitation of life, so we could live as lullaby, Sheba, red bone, and black crossing. That's all Miss Saar. I think I wrote this when I didn't get what my teenage nieces and nephews were talking about, which is often. Clash. Not that I get the hang of our generational collage, but I resemble prestidigitation when I turn thunderbolt. I can say milk tree when I eye someone's mumbo jumbo, while I tell you I am bone and drain. Make book, you are common shorthand versus exaggeration. I am little leaf linden, you are someone believes. If we were we would need them of the black markings. It is everyone's last season, a paradox inside the incredulity of cuckolds. And the rest of us leapt over. Then came you, it had to be you. I think that I, the way that we, with liberty and justice for no one. Jimmy Baldwin saying, people are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them. Mr. Rogers asking, won't you be my neighbor? Nina Simone chiding, oh, sinner man, where are you gonna run? This is also a cento that we talked about before, a quilted poem of lines of Langston Hughes. Langston won't stay in his grave. Calls me rose of neon darkness. Calls himself early blue evening, black smoke of sound. Says, we are related, you and I. Reminds me we are wandering in the dusk, our faces a chocolate bar, facing the night of 2 moons. And though I'm a lonely little question mark, he laughs. Life is for the living with gypsies and sailors. Till the old junk man death plants your feet in the cool swamp mud, shake those brown feet, honey. Wander through this living world. Get out the lunchbox of your dreams. stay awake all night with loving, or be a woman in the doorway. Death don't ring no doorbells or say, here is that sleeping place, as if it were some noble thing. Think how thin and sharp the moon is tonight. Don't mind dying, veiling what darkness hides. Haunt like mystery, like a naked bone in gumbo. Nod at the sun. And I'll close with this. I wanted to read this because we're so close to the Pacific. You'll see why at the end. Poinsettias and other continuums of forgetting. Remember this irony? Art makes order out of chaos. Maybe I need to write a poem about forgetting. The annual flowering of poinsettias in my mother's garden. The discovery that flowers can effuse a milk children cannot drink. I remember the day a man walked on the moon and one of us, looking out the window, said, I don't see anyone. If time is a continuum, didn't all this happen just yesterday? Maybe we are each a poem about forgetting. There was a man, I don't know him anymore, who had particular fingers, mostly squared at their tips. He had a particular scent which remains unassigned. He held out his hand. And what do I remember? He held out his hand, and it was a day bright lit as a galvanized penny, and we walked by the Pacific, and we, neither of us, remember seeing anything else. Maybe I should write a poem about the sea. Thank you.
Can we hear it once again for Lynne Thompson? So Lynne, thank you again. I know you have a background as an attorney, and in one of your poems you said literature and law, how they enshrine dichotomy. And I was wondering how your background as an attorney informs your practice as a poet.
It usually does not. I very rarely talk about anything that has to do with the law. I use snippets like in that example. I will tell you though that I am seriously considering working on some poems based on some recently given executive orders, because I suspect there's a lot of fodder in there for poetry. So I'm thinking about that. But in general, it really hasn't impacted my work as much, but I've been thinking about it a little bit more.
Okay. So maybe it's to come.
It's to come. It took a while. I'm a recovering attorney.
So,
That's great.
so knowing you were the City Poet Laureate of Los Angeles and you were appointed during COVID, what did you learn from that and what were the challenges of doing that?
Well, this is a point where the lawyer really did kick in, because when they sent me the contract, it was written as though we were not in the middle of COVID. Have a festival, go to schools, go to I called them up, I said, I'm not signing this. Oh, I said, oh, don't worry about it. But of course the challenge was that we couldn't gather in places the way that we might have wanted to. I couldn't go to schools. Children were being taught over Zoom. And as horrible as Zoom can be, sometimes Zoom was a lifesaver, because I could go into classrooms and I could read for libraries over Zoom, and that's what I did. I also started a podcast where I would read the poems of others, none of my own poems, but the poems of others once a week, so people know they could get their 5 minutes of poetry every week on Thursdays. It's still on the LA Library website, Poems on Air. And then by the second year, it started to open up a little bit so that I could go out into the community in the way that a laureate is intended to go, and finished up by having a day of poetry at the downtown public library where there were about 200 poets present, 60 of whom read one poem. I was very strict. One poem. Blather on about, well, if I want to thank my mother, I said, that's part of your 2 minutes. Have at it. That's it, you know. So that was a great success. We got a beautiful photograph out of it, and so it was a difficult term, but what I learned was there's more than one way to skin a cat.
She said in the last poem that you wrote, you said art makes order out of chaos. I'm wondering that when you're writing a poem, do you feel like all the fragments and events that make up the poem create an order so that you understand these different fragments anew as a unity?
Sometimes you understand them as a unity, sometimes you don't understand them at all. I always use my family as kind of a touch point to say, am I making any sense? And they always tell me uniformly, no. We don't know what you're talking about. But mercifully, other poets and lovers of poetry and readers will say, well, I think I get it. And to me, that's the best answer, because your feeling about a particular poem might change over time based on the experience you're bringing to the poem. I always feel like the poem isn't done until someone reads it or hears it, because I'm bringing myself, but really what's missing is the audience, right? So I'm fine with there not being true order, despite that saying.
I'm going to leave you with the microphone so we can open up. Does anyone have any questions for Lynne?
I do. So you were just saying you might write some poems about consecutive orders, and it just made me think about how I and other poets and poetry lovers that I know often say they don't like political poetry, and that's so curious because I also am like, everything's political, you know, but there's so many protests going on. Have you seen any new protest poetry coming out, or are there any protest poets, if that's even like the term, that you like and you feel get it and are not hampered in whatever can make a poem weak if you've got this?
Yeah, you still want it to be a poem, even if you're addressing a specific political situation, although, as you said, writing about the sea could be political, right? So I think when I think of poets that I really admire, the one that obviously that comes to mind for me is Carolyn Forche, who had actually been in Nicaragua and several points in Central America. I saw a post that she had the other day. Of course, she's very concerned about what's going on in El Salvador and what's going on here, for that matter. We don't have to go that far to be concerned, whatever our beliefs are. I think there's something for everyone to be concerned about. And I think that the poets are starting to address that, some very well, some not as well, because sometimes it takes a minute for something to gel. So if you dash something off, if you're really lucky and you're, I don't know, Natasha Trethewey, or, you know, name your favorite poet, Sharon Olds, maybe it works right away. But for the rest of us, we have to work at it a bit. The interesting thing, though, is, unfortunately, I guess, it's never dated. Because my favorite saying is, we learn from history that we learn nothing from history. We keep doing the same dumb things over and over again. So the poems are always pertinent. I think of another poet, Nazim Hikmet, who was a Greek poet who was jailed and wrote a lot of political poems. A lot of the Russians obviously wrote a lot of political poems that are still remain today. So, did you have a question as well? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
If you don't mind me asking, like, you referenced your mother a few times.
Yes.
And, the poem, you know, about your mother. Like, can you talk a little bit about your relationship with her, if you're comfortable, and how, you know, how that's generated your work?
Both of my mothers, my birth mother and my adopted mother, figure frequently in my poems. They're great fodder. I mean, relationships with parents are just great for poems, good, bad, or indifferent. But certainly, the fact of my adoption and meeting my birth mother when I was in law school, my head was spinning, in my 20s, gave me a lot to think about and was at times a wonderful experience, at other times not so wonderful. So I've written a lot about both of them, both in positive ways and negative ways. Neither of them are here to beat me up about it. I am not sure, I might have written them when they were alive. I'm not sure I would have read them in public. So I'm clearly still working through some issues, but they both show up a lot in my poems.
Can I just ask one? You are so poised and mindful when you speak. Were you always like that? You know, was it part of your development as a lawyer?
Well, thank you for the compliment. It was partially as of my development as a lawyer, where you have to present in court. But I was surprised to hear I have 4 older brothers, to hear one of them saying, when someone at a reading asked him, was he surprised at his sister? And he said, "You have got to be kidding me." When she was 2, she's on top of a table, she's dancing, she's talking, she's doing all the. And he said, "No, I'm not surprised." So apparently, that's always been inside of me.
Thank you.
Yes.
One of the lines from your poem really is just sticking in my mind, like a naked bone in gumbo. I lived in Louisiana, I ate a lot of gumbo, but what does that mean to you? What does that really?
Well, in the context of the poem, and remember, I would love to say that's my line, that's Langston Hughes, right?
Oh.
So that poem is a cento or cento of his lines remixed, right? And I'm not sure what his intention was originally, because I can't remember what poem I stole it out of. But in this poem, I'm saying, be like that bone in gumbo that is there to take advantage of, even if all the meat's falling off of it, right? So that's the context I'm using it in, but it is a Langston Hughes line. Yeah.
What's the name, because I did that with poem Mary Oliver's.
Yes.
And what is it called?
It's either, depending on who you ask, there's an argument among poets, some poets. It's an Italian word. It's either cento, I think that's correct. But I've also heard it pronounced cento. So.
And what is the?
And it means patchwork or quilt. So you're taking, just very quickly, I've done it with multiple poets, but if you're using just one poet, try to find someone like Mary Oliver who has a substantial body of work. Pull out lines at random. Don't think about it a lot. Just pull out lines at random. Find one that you think is a great opening line and go from there. That's basically how I do it.
Maybe one more?
Yes. Did you have a question?
Partially, because this is a little out of the blue.
Blue on a blue palette. Very good. Thank you for advertising. No, I'm just teasing.
I was actually curious if you seem like you have an affinity towards arts, and you referenced some art pieces. Are you also an artist as well?
In my next life. I would love to be a visual artist, but one of my mothers, really, I'm still mad about this. 2nd or 3rd grade, my mother was not a big laugher, but I showed her a picture I had drawn of a horse, and she absolutely collapsed on the ground in laughing. She said, "Please don't draw."
Oh, no.
This is not a good thing to say to a child, but I have tried, nevertheless, and I do a lot of what's called decoupage, which is cutting out pieces from magazines and newspapers and pasting them together. But in my next life, I'll be an artist. But I do appreciate art. People that write specifically about art are writing ekphrastic poems. That's the terminology, and I write those occasionally. But I always include artists in my work.
Rachel, you had a question.
First of all, thank you, Lynn, so much for your beautiful reading. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
I always love learning about poets' writing practices and rituals and what inspires them. So I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about that and what inspired you with this book as well.
Okay, two parts. Let me just say briefly about the practice. My practice is not to stress about it. There's a well-known saw that, oh, you've got to write for 4 hours every day. I don't do that because I know myself well enough to know, first of all, I usually like to work on 2 or 3 pieces at a time as opposed to just one piece. But once I'm onto a poem, I can work for 12 hours straight. So I don't really worry that I don't write every day because I know once, and I know the juices will get going at some point, that I'll just be like a dog with a bone. So it's not the practice that you read about in books, but they're books.
Oh, I love it.
And in terms of this book was compiled while I was the Poet Laureate because I wasn't writing. I was trying to engage in community activities and all of that. So someone said, if you think you have enough poems, why don't you work on a new book? And I said, but they're all over the place and there's no theme and there's no nothing. But then when I went and looked at them, I realized 2 things. How many of them were about women and how many of them mentioned the color blue? And I thought, or the blues, the musical blues. So I thought, maybe there's something here. So that's really how it came together. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't anything. I have a good friend, well-known poet David St. John, for my first book. He said, well, it's time for you to have a book. And I said, is that how it works? Aren't I supposed to have a project or a plan? He said, oh, just look at the poems and put them together. I thought, for heaven's sakes, that doesn't sound very organized. You know, my lawyer head was like, that cannot be right. That cannot be right. But, you know, usually, maybe without being aware of it, you're writing about something you're obsessed about, be it nature, be it whatever it is, politics, romance, family, you're obsessed with it. And if you go back and look at a year's worth of poems, you'll start to see those themes come out.
Thank you.
Are we done?
There's one more question.
There's one more.
Okay, last question from
You guys fight it out.
Did you go back to school?
I did not go back to school. I had just finished paying off my law school loans. I was not about to go back to school. But what I did do was went to every reading I could go to, every workshop I could go to, every lecture I could go to, listen to things online, bought as many books as I could afford, subscribed to as many journals, and just over, somebody said, a young student, said, but doesn't that take longer? I said, what, you got ants in your pants? What's the rush? Yes, it takes longer, but you will get there. So it can be done. It can be done. Thank you, everyone, so much. I look forward to hearing some of this power.
One more thing, get us books back there.
I do have books for sale, cash, check, or Zelle, and you're in.
Awesome.
How much?
How much?
18.
18. All right. Thank you, Lynne Thompson. Great.